Hello again, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the book Les Miserables. I read this quite a number of years ago, around the same time that I read the Metamorphosis. Sorry, my shoulder has been giving me grief lately. Anyway, actually it was closer to the time that I read Robinson Crusoe, because it was for that same English class. Again, this was for the class where the teacher for the English class had a list of books, and we had to pick one, read it, do a book report. I had decided to read this book because for my French class that I had previously, we had watched the movie. It wasn't in French, it was the English version with, what's his name? Anyway, it was not the most recent musical adaptation with, Hugh Jackman. But the previous, made-for-television version, I don't remember. Anyway, we had watched that to kind of get a sense of French history for the French class. Anyway, I digress. So I picked up the book, I read it. Yes, cover to cover, unabridged version. Yes. If you do read this, I recommend the abridged version unless you're really, really interested in my opinion, a lot of padding. Anyway, let me get into the book. So this book is, was originally published in 1862. It has, depending on the version that you get, around 1,462 pages. So it's quite a hefty book. And if you aren't familiar with the story of Les Miserables, I'm surprised. This is one of the most famous books of the 19th century, and it has been made into many different adaptations. The musical was a huge thing when that came out, and then again the Hugh Jackman version of the musical as well. So the book is ostensibly about Jean Valjean and how he fell from grace, as it were, and then achieved redemption in his later life. The history. So, in the book, it starts around 1815 in France, and it is. It starts with Jean Valjean getting out of prison. He had been convicted to prison for 19 years. And the reason he was convicted and sent to prison was originally because he stole some bread to feed his starving family. It was actually his sister and his sister's children, but his family. You never find out what happened to his sister and her children. Possibly they died. It's just never made clear what happened to them. Basically, Jean Valjean goes to prison and gets out 19 years later. Like I said, originally he was sent to prison for stealing this bread, but he then attempts to escape from prison multiple times, and as such, he gets more and more years tacked onto his prison sentence. He eventually is released from prison, and he can't find a job, he can't find a place to live, because he's an ex-convict. I know that this will resonate with a lot of people even now, because it's very hard for ex-convicts sometimes to find a legitimate place of work after they get out of prison. They're not necessarily treated all that well. But anyway, He ends up at a church, and in the night he steals a bunch of silver from the church in the form of silverware and leaves. But the police take him, capture him, take him back, and the bishop who runs that particular church says, "Oh, you forgot these silver candlesticks." And so the police think that the bishop had given him these things, and it's at this point that Jean Valjean starts to turn his life around. He can't figure out initially why this bishop would do this. The bishop telling him that he had been purchased for God and that he should use the money he gets from the silver to do good. And he kind of goes back, he steals some more money, but then he does end up feeling bad about what he's done and trying to better his life. It's at this point that he becomes a factory owner and he becomes wealthy. He ends up being the mayor of this small town. Again, not using his real name because he was a convict. And he is a very, very strong man. There's a cart. It pins someone. He climbs underneath it and is able to lift the cart by himself off of this gentleman. Nobody else was doing anything. They get him out from underneath there. And this is where his life kind of, his life intersects with that of I don't remember his Javert. Javert. So Javert was a prison guard at the prison where Jean Valjean was, and when he saw Jean Valjean climb underneath this cart and basically lift it off this guy, he realized that Jean Valjean was not who he said he was, that he was this former convict. And that is what kind of starts his running from the law at this point. Again, being the man that he is, he's still in charge of his factory and everything. Javert really can't prove that he is who he thinks he is, but he tells the authorities that that's who he thinks he is. And the authorities don't believe him because they find a man who they are sure is Jean Valjean, and they arrest him instead. Well, in the meantime, we get introduced to Cosette and Fantine. Fantine was a typical girl in Paris. She fell in with some rather disreputable gentlemen. They were gentlemen, but these people were not actually gentlemen because they abandoned Fantine and her friends. Fantine ended up becoming pregnant with the one guy's child, and in order to care for her child, she leaves it with this family who abuses her, leaves her child with this family, and she ends up working for Jean Valjean, but she ends up very sick. She ends up selling her hair. She pulls out her 2 front teeth to sell them. There's a whole bunch of stuff that she does in order to keep paying these really awful people in order to take care of her daughter. Now, I'm getting towards the 10-minute mark, and we haven't even left the first book, the first volume in this lengthy tome. Javert and Jean Valjean end up coming back together because Fantine basically attacks a man, and she ends up getting sentenced to 6 months in prison. But Jean Valjean gets the law to leave her alone and let him take her into his custody. And it's at this point that she ends up in the hospital, very much dying. And Jean Valjean promises to go get her daughter Cosette, bring her to her, but she ends up dying, and Jean Valjean ends up going to the place where Cosette is being taken care of, and finds Cosette in a really, really bad situation. This family is abusing her, and he ends up paying 1,500 francs to be able to take her. He also shows them a letter that her mother Fantine signed that said she could take her. He ends up getting out of there. At this point, it's much later. It's 1832. Fantine is older. She ends up meeting a man named Marius, who she falls in love with. Marius also ends up meeting and falling in. Well, I shouldn't say he meets, but he's in league with the students and stuff that end up causing this civil disturbance that is kind of there at the end of the book. But he also ends up meeting this family that had been abusing Cosette. And through figuring out what they're doing with Jean Valjean and Cosette, whom he's in love with, he ends up foiling the plans and of this really wicked family. I'm trying to. The thing is that the book goes through the rest of the life of Jean Valjean, and it is a compelling read. Let me get that straight. It is a compelling read, but one of the things that this book is known for are the digressions. Now, this is where the page count gets a little murky, because by one account, the page count is 1,462. And these digressions that take the form of essays on cloistered religious orders, construction of the parish sewers, Argot, the street urchins of Paris, all these things, they don't advance the plot. They don't advance any of the subplots. They're just put in there. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, by all means, read the unabridged version of Les Mis. But if you're not, if those don't make any difference to you whatsoever, get the abridged version. Go look for those essays somewhere else, because they are not necessary to getting through the story at all in any way, shape, or form. I have likened this to, in my experience reading this book, I likened this to reading a textbook on French history that has a story woven into it. And you have these, apparently one biographer, I found this on Wikipedia, but A.F. Davidson said of Victor Hugo that the digressions of genius are easily pardoned. I don't feel that they are easily pardoned. If I wanted to read a textbook on French history, I would get a textbook on French history. I wanted to read the story of these people and their lives. I didn't need to know about the construction of the Paris sewers. It makes no difference to me whatsoever to find out about the construction of the Paris sewers, especially since it doesn't advance the plot in any way. Yes, there is a point where Jean Valjean is sneaking through the sewers of Paris, and that comes into later in the book. But I don't need to know about the construction of the Paris sewers to know that Jean Valjean is sneaking through the sewers. It has no bearing on the story whatsoever. So this, like I said, this is where that page count comes in, because it says more than a quarter of the novel, or it says, this article that I found says more than a quarter of the novel, by one count, 955 of the 2,783 pages are these digressions. So by one count, I found 1,462 pages. Another count was 2,783 pages. Either way, it's a long book, and with at least a quarter of the novel devoted to essays and moral points of these essays that argue these moral points of view and things of Victor Hugo's, that do nothing, that serve in no way to advance the plot or to explain why anything's going on. They're I don't want to say they're pointless, because there is a point to them. The point is to explore these things, but in reference to the story, there's no point. So they shouldn't be there. And a good editor would have chopped these out completely, would have said, this doesn't make any sense to put this here, get rid of it. But again, this book was written in the 1800s, which was at that time the preferred, I shouldn't say the preferred, basically authors got paid by the word at this point in time. So because they got paid by the word, a lot of authors did things like this to pad the length of their novels. And I shouldn't say novels, because a lot of times they were serialized in, say, the newspaper or something. So you'd get one chapter every week or so. And by adding these these digressions into the book, they got paid more money. And so, you know, a lot of times this stuff wouldn't have been edited out, because the author would definitely have fought to keep it in, because he would have got paid more to keep this stuff in. So that being said, Les Miserables is very well written, very well done. The characters are compelling. The story is compelling. It's way too long. Way too long. If this had come out now, it would have definitely been broken up over at least 2 books, and if not 3. And in addition, those digressions would have been removed. So, like I said, that's my hot take on it. Please let me know down in the comments whether you agree or disagree, and whether or not you read Les Miserables and enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it. Put on the bell, like and subscribe, and enjoy what you're reading.